Hello, students, and welcome to lecture number 7 in our International Education NASBITE training materials. Today, we're going to talk about um, pricing strategies, costing allocations, tariffs and barriers, pricing strategies, etc. So let's jump right into it, shall we? Let me hit the share and we'll get right to the right screen. All right, here we go. To a certain extent, we've already talked about pricing for export. In other words, if you're not setting up a factory in another country so that you have direct manufacture and direct distribution, that is, if you're exporting from, in this example, the US, then indeed you're going to have additional costs than you would have for just selling domestically. And it's your responsibility as the international manager to explain that to the CFO, the CEO, and others. Here's just an example, and I'm sorry for the blurry nature of this picture, but basically, when you're looking at, you might recall X Works, and basically that is the price to your facility, your factory, if you will. So you see the general X Works costs, but there are additional exporting costs as well. If I have a distributor, retailer, etc., I'm going to have to pay a sales commission. So either that's got to go on top of what I'm charging or come out of my margin or profit. Export packaging, labeling, inland freight, etc., etc. You see all these freight and insurance costs all the way up to the delivery to the customer. Those are all additional prices you're going to have to pay. So again, if you are not distributing or selling in the local market from your own manufacturer, unfortunately, you're going to have to add these costs. And the big question becomes, how can I be competitive in that market? Well, there's a couple of theories on that. Um, the NASBITE material suggests that pricing should be market driven, and basically, instead of you pushing a price, what the market is going to set a price. Well, that's simple economics, isn't it? If you go into a country where they're not willing to pay your price for your goods, there's no reason to be there. So you can, whether you do consumer testing, talk to distributors reps, look at what your competitors are doing, you can hopefully find an appropriate price for that market. Okay. Again, here's another good chart for the various margins or costs that you have to add on for an international sales transaction. Let's say you are the manufacturer and the exporter. Well, you're still going to have to pay 2% freight forwarder, customs broker on the other side when they import. Transport might be up to 10%, custom broker import again, another 1%. Then possibly importer, distributor, and retailer. You might not use a retailer, it might be business to business, so you can cut that 46 out, but you can see all these various margins that will go to entities other than your company. And again, that needs to be explained to the CFO especially and to sales. I have a good website hypertext link here for you for an example of an export pricing worksheet in case you want to do it in later years in your own company. Um, this just reiterates what we have said. Um, let's keep going. Now, here's again, this is, you've already learned this in accounting, but let's just touch on this real quickly. Do we absorb these sales of international sales? Um, Here's an example of the absorption costing, which a lot of companies use. So if you have cost of goods sold and you spend another X amount on overhead expenses, then that's 2 million on the 10 million sales left. That's net income before tax. Okay, well, that shows you here. Cost of goods sold. In other words, the direct costs, overhead, and that leaves you with a profit. Now, if your company uses what's known as an absorption costing approach, so for new projects in our context, international projects, if the company sells a product for $1 each, obviously 40 cents of that dollar is going to direct costs, labor, raw materials, etc. And we would take 40% to pay for overhead. So absorption costing says every new sale, onto every new sale, you have to add, if you will, 40% in overhead expenses before you determine your margin or your profit. Okay. Now, if you decide you're going to use the same structure for export sales, you do the same thing. Every sale has to absorb that overhead. However, if you find that you have to reduce your price so that you can actually make sales in the foreign country, okay, some companies will provide the lowest price they're willing to sell to cover. So in this instance, your CFO might say, okay, in order to get into the foreign market, we're willing to sell at 81 cents, 40 cents direct cost, 40% absorption, and 1 cent of profit. So that's could mean a minimum overhead allocation at which your company be willing to sell. And then hopefully you're able to raise it as you have market acceptance in that foreign country. Slightly, product recognition, product loyalty, etc. All right. Key concept, don't forget this. Market-driven pricing simply means the market determines what the final price is, what the market is willing to pay. Now, one problem with absorption costing, and if your company is just moving from domestic, that is whatever country you're in, sales to international sales, your CFO, your accounting department will be used to this absorption costing method. It's good accounting principles. Now, they have to be advised, of course, of the additional incremental costs of the distribution channel. And so if they just try to sell your product, for example, at the 81 cents, you're losing money because you have to pay freight, insurance, shipping, et cetera, et cetera. So when people, when companies try to look at market-driven pricing and work backwards, that's sometimes difficult. So some are NASBITE says many exporters use a marginal cost or variable cost approach to price their products. Okay. And the point is, if my product is already profitable in my home or domestic market, they will apportion all the burden. Keep in mind the 40% direct costs, 40% overhead. They will take 100% of that overhead on domestic sales. And so export sales don't get the 40%. That means you are starting on your export sales at the 40-cent cost. And then you can start adding things like freight, shipping, commissions to your international distributors, etc. So that is one way to approach. Now, your domestic sales teams can say, wait a minute, that's not fair. When you're looking at my net income, you're throwing all the overhead on me. That's just not fair. So yes, there'll be pushback from certain departments, but you have to keep in mind this is for a CEO that is committed to expanding international sale markets. Uh, we just discussed that. So now let's look at it from coming from market driven going backwards. Market driven pricing says 70 cents is what you can get. This company we just talked about that absorbs elsewhere gets 40 cents of direct costs and then earns 30 cents as contribution towards overhead. Now, when we consider international distribution, insurance, et cetera, that's not very accurate because you also have to take additional sales as well. This is just a comparison of the absorption costing versus marginal cost approach, where you don't attribute all the overhead to each new or international sale. Again, if you're new in the international market, there's going to be some pushback from accounting, sales, et cetera, because this is a new model that you haven't been using. If you're in a company that's already invested in international sales, either they might be trying to set up in different markets for manufacture and or distribution, or they're in the transition period, they may be using this model. Now, we also, the time I'm filming this, tariffs and duties are a uh, huge issue, uh, political, strong political issue right now. And I'm not going to get into the political side of it, but keep in mind a couple of things. Number one, a tariff is not the same as a duty. A tariff is the classification, and the duty is how much you pay. So the tariff might say, we're calling it this, and then when you get to the duty, you have to pay X% on such and such. That's literally what you pay. Now, there are also barriers that some countries use that aren't formal tariffs. And they'll say things like, well, we're not charging a US company 10% to import into, I'm just coming up with names, Japan. Uh, but the country might establish a restrictive quota. You can only import so much rice into Japan from the US per year, so much grain, so much da 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 per year. So this basically is the way to establish a barrier to your product, even though it's not a formal tariff. We call it a non-tariff barrier or incentive. I'll let you read these on your own, but you can see there are a number of different kinds of, I'm going to call it walls or impediments to your importing into the foreign country, uh, which you have to overcome. Next, uh, looking on the other side is what they call the export incentives. So the government will actually give you subsidies. In the US, they used to have tax breaks to where if you were exporting, you got certain tax benefits. Um, China, I believe, has many things where if you're an exporter, you get favorable treatment in various ways. But this is a sort of a reverse or corollary of what we've been talking about, not an impediment, but a way to encourage companies to export regardless of where you are. I'll let you read through these, but we've talked about these already. But some of the incentive programs, lending, small business administration, assistant financing, etc. These I've just given you hypertext links and names of government organizations in the US that assist financially with your exports. Let's jump back to quoting methods. This is just kind of a sale flow. Customer, uh, no, I don't like this one. Anyway, yeah, you quote, okay, I'm going to sell so many Samsung phones at this price. The customer sends you the order. You take the order, you get all the inventory, you manufacture, and then you ship it, and then you invoice it. Now, what about the quoting stage of that transaction flow? When we get a customer that requests a quote, RFQ, request for a quote. Now, if the more oftentimes the more serious a customer is, the more formal the quote they require in huge engineering, whether it be civil construction, huge equipment for millions, etc. It's a very comprehensive quoting process, and everything from the terms to you have to agree that you can meet the technical specifications to you may have to actually submit a bid bond, etc., etc. In any of these cases where you are asked for a formal quote, Please recall, what is an invoice? I've sold you something. Here's the bill. Here's the invoice. But on the front end of the transaction, when your customer's asking, how much will you charge for? You send what's known as a pro forma invoice. It's not the actual final invoice, but you are representing customer. This is what it will look like. This is our quote. So be familiar with that term as you're going into business. Um, some, as we've talked about on the financial side before, especially like engineering companies, huge manufacturing, et cetera, the quoting process itself can take a lot of time and money from your company. And as you well know, in this day and age, I'm using a boomer term, but in current times, um, we get a lot of fraud, just fishing for companies' information, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of companies that are doing quotes will actually qualify prospective buyers to make sure they're legitimate. Check their website, ask questions. They might ask for bank references, et cetera, see if it's a legitimate company and it's their website, for example. When I'm quoting, I'll let you read this, but these are the things that I should put in my quote to the international customer. Um, Within it, you either want to say this is quoting is all exclusive of shipping, or the shipping, or have the customer pay for the shipping. You don't have to worry about it. Again, that's a matter of leverage. Will the company agree to that? Or say, this is our quote for shipping we have today, but when we ship this thing in a month, we don't know if that's the same shipping, but we'll pass through the shipping costs. So please be careful with those terms. Now, Incoterms, hopefully this is familiar with, but again, it's worth going over. When you just sell domestically in your own country, you're going to have shipping and transfer of title, et cetera, terms under your US law. But almost every country in the world in international sales will voluntarily use these Incoterms. They're generated by a private company or private entity, but countries around the world adopt them that say your customers, companies are able to refer to them and adopt them. So again, keep this chart and it basically shows who has responsibility to do what. If I quote X works, top left, all the blue things as you go down the column, those are all items for which the buyer, your customer, must pay. You're just paying for packaging as far as transport, etc. Conversely, let's say you quote that and your customer says, oh no, I need a DDP, far right, delivery duty paid. Look at all these things you're going to have to pay for from packaging, loading, insurance, probably, destination charge, import duty, etc. So if your customer's pulling a fast one on you, says, "Oh yeah, we accept your quote, the price you quoted, but we need it DDP," you better be darn sure to go back, recalculate the quote, and say, "We can only accept your PO with these additional costs, which our quote did not initially refer to." So be careful. Some buyers are tricky and will try to do that to you. Uh, what are current competitive pricing in the local market? Well, you're literally go shopping there online, if you will. Sometimes that is a very good way to find out what the actual pricing structure is in the local country. Go shopping, use these research methods, etc. Now, payment methods. Now, there are various ways that you can be paid by the customer. All right. Um, and they range from what is beneficial to you as the seller on one side to what is beneficial to the customer. Let's go through those. In other words, payment or payment security, how they pay. Um, Gotta move those, sorry. This we will discuss in another week. So let's jump down to marketing strategies. What are some of the tools that we use for marketing? Well, there's some good ones actually. I like trade shows because basically, and I'll have you look at that video, but basically, you go and see the potential customers in their market. I'll let you look at horizontal, vertical, international. The ones you do a lot is international trade shows where you just buy a booth space. Your company goes over, you set up, and you get all sorts of leads while you're there for your distributor, local agent, your people, etc., whoever's selling in that country or region. But trade shows are, in some instances, they're a great way to find leads in the country. When you go to these kind of a trade shows, you pay for exhibit space. Um, you pay for media exposure. Hey, you're in the on the website. There'll be exhibitor awards for the best booth, et cetera, et cetera. Um, I haven't found this quite as helpful as some do, but there's a lot of times government departments will put on trade missions where you go with government people. Your vice president of sales goes to China on a trade mission and blah, blah, blah. And hey, we're going to meet some potential customers. My opinion, not the opinion of anyone else. Frankly, I think these are to a certain degree just a way for certain executives to get a vacation and to go to a foreign country. But some I've met with some people, some companies that it's actually worked for them. They've received significant sales. You go with a government entity, you go to a certain country or region, you meet potential customers. Obviously, and here we get into technology where you students will be frankly better than your boomer professor. So I won't presume to jump in it, but I will note that make sure your website's globalized. If you have major markets with major linguistic differences, please, you don't have to translate into 100 different languages, but the major languages where products are sold. If I'm selling into China, I certainly need to have, the two major Chinese languages. If I'm selling into France, French, et cetera, et cetera. So you may want to have website domains that end in the country where you're selling. Okay. FR for France, et cetera, et cetera. But make sure that you have, and if I'm a US company, for example, but I'm on my France website, I'm going to be selling in euros, for example. Uh, so just the various currency. So just take it upon yourself as the international specialist in your company to review your website and see if you have to make changes to adapt to a local international market into which you are entering. I won't even go into SEO, but you guys are familiar with SEO, search optimization, where either you know how to do it, you can find your own tools, or you get an IT professional that pushes more search traffic to your website. Um, AdWords, Google, pay-per-click, etc. I presume you're all well familiar with that. Social media, I have mixed feelings. Social and perhaps it's because I'm a little prejudiced by my age, but yes, we have a lot of exposure to social media, YouTube, Instagram, even for old people, Facebook, X, whatever it happens to be. But in any event, um, I my humble opinion is that I find that more persuasive in consumer sales, household products, everything from makeup to baby food, whatever, than it would be with business to business sales. So please keep that in mind. I mean, if I'm selling oil and gas equipment to Saudi Arabia, I am not planning on Instagram posts to talk about my equipment. I'm dealing directly with them and have a website and et cetera and give technical specs. If I'm selling a new makeup into Canada, indeed, I may indeed use X, Instagram, et cetera, as part of my web presence. Traffic conversions, website conversions, I'll let you look at that. Tells you how much is your data is going to tell you how many pages are read, what content's downloaded, how often are people on your website, et cetera, et cetera. Email captures, kind of getting to be old technology, but you offer something to the target market. You hope you get more and more people emailing into your company, maybe free product, coupons, et cetera. Uh, Payment, well, that's just, you just, with big companies, you're probably still going to be using the SWIFT system, international wire transfers through banking. But if you're on the retail side, you're just going to have to use credit card enabled and or uh, various payment platforms that are available. You just have to. Um, Broadcast promotion. I won't even bother looking at that. Targeted promotion. Again, in marketing, that's just talking about when whether I'm doing it from Facebook to persons visiting customers, market segmentation. Make sure that you uh, go to the right demographic to whom you're selling to create brand awareness and differentiate your product from others. Uh, that one we've already talked about. And finally, here's some assistance for international marketing that certain government entities, at least in the US, provide for US companies. Other countries have the same thing. All right. Thank you for joining, and I will plan on seeing you next lecture.